I want to talk about imprinting. I was just thinking about something interesting. I read a little bit of this article Michael Tessarian wrote about idolatry and how idolatry seems to be something that is so like ubiquitous and replete throughout all of human history that it's like there's something about it that seems as if it's like a natural thing that takes place with the human mind, but we of course use it too much. In the same way, if we have certain kinds of proclivities that are natural to us, but being that we're sentient beings, we can overdo it, right? It's natural to want to build a house, like that's like a really, or just to have a dwelling. That's like the most ancient of human things is to have a dwelling, to have something over your head, to be dry and warm if it's cold and wet outside. Just to have something. So that's natural, but we can overdo it. We can overdo it because once we build that, we're like, oh, well, we can add even more. We can make something grotesquely huge for just one person. You know, he'll never use any of these rooms. He's just got to have all this space. So there's a lot of ways this can happen. This overcompensation. The way Michael's talking about it, it's with everything. Words, concepts, philosophies, ideas. There's a kind of idolatry that we get into. It's like icon worship, symbol worship. It's because of the way it impacts our mind. And it's interesting because it's natural. You have to understand, like, a big part of it is natural. It's natural to be, in a way, tantalized by the things you encounter in this reality. Just, it like tantalizes your senses. And when we're tantalized by something and we're very intrigued by something, our separated minds can almost like make a god out of it, or like an object of worship. And it's almost like, you know how if somebody rescues a baby animal when they're really tiny, and there's so many videos like this all over YouTube now. Somebody rescues a sparrow and they keep it alive and they raise it. That sparrow is imprinted so much by the person, and that sparrow is going to be with them for life. Even if they eventually let it out and it can fly on its own, it always comes back and it lands on their shoulders, and it's just like wanting to, get all close to them and nestle close to them, and there's like a relationship there. There's a bond there that cannot be broken. Same thing, like if ducklings don't have a mother and they were raised by a human, they're going to follow that person everywhere. That the person that raised them, that took care of them, is their mother now. Now it's fascinating to see this with all different kinds of animals. It's fun to watch videos like that sometimes. But think about it in terms of your mind itself. Like, this kind of thing happens with animals, of course. But there's a more, you could say, sophisticated version of that kind of imprinting that takes place with human beings. And it has to do with the mind itself. And our social order, our culture, that stuff becomes the mother, so to speak. That is like what Freud called the superego. Now, I'm going to take it even further and say that it's not just the culture and it's not just your parents or the people around you that are imprinting you in this way. It's the mind itself. The world itself as it's perceived through the mind only. The mind has to go through stages of development in apprehending the world, understanding the world, interacting with the world. And it's almost like the world itself becomes that surrogate in a strange way. And how the mind perceives it, not even necessarily the world as it is, but more how the mind receives it. And yes, culturally, that, how we interpret things culturally, that's a big part. But this whole thing with the filtration of how the mind is perceiving the world, how the world is presenting itself to us, that becomes the great idol, right? That's the ultimate form of idolatry. Because the mind and its connection to the ego, really, is the ultimate. That's like God, that's how the mind, it's really how it behaves. And it's almost how we expect it because we're so used to it. It's the one thing we've noticed that has been there the whole time. Even if your mother left you alone in a crib, even if you were left alone and you weren't, maybe if you were neglected in some way, what was always there? What's always there? Your mind. That's what's always there. And the coping mechanisms you've created, these little areas in your mind where you can just be like, okay, in your little padded room, right? It's like that becomes the real form of idolatry. And I really think that our ego awareness is a big part of that, because we see our separated self, our minds, as this ultimate kind of thing that you can rely on no matter what. It's kind of like that movie Revolver. I don't like that movie. I really, really don't. It seems super pretentious to me. But there is one scene in the end where the guy confronts his own ego, which is his own mind, his own fear mechanisms that are like on autopilot. And the way the dialogue is going between them, the ego part, the mind part is just like, where would you be without me? I am you. I've taken care of you this whole time. But that's the part of you. It's the part of him that's like whispering, like, we gotta get out of here. We gotta get out of here. We gotta get. And it's just like, it's like super paranoid. And it's so funny that we invest so much in that part of ourselves because it seems like it's got your ass. It's the part of us that's the most apparent. It's the most loud. It's the most present, apparently. It's the thing that's there all the time. It never goes away. It never abandoned you. All these other things abandoned you, right? You were abandoned by this person. You were abandoned by your parents. You were abandoned this way. You were abandoned by God. You were abandoned by the world. You were abandoned by everything, but not the old mind. Oh, it never abandoned you. It's always been there. It's always been there looking out for you, It's fascinating. And I think that's the ultimate imprint. That's the ultimate imprinting that took place for us. Coming into this reality, the mind, just like an octopus on our soul, it's got its tentacles out. It's risk assessing. It's doing all this, and it's just getting neurotic sensitivities about things, and the way it is, the way that does filter through culture and societal norms, and the way it's kind of being exacerbated through social media and other things. I mean, I'm really into Anthony William, and I think heavy metals are playing a big part in the kind of, you could say, the mental meltdown that people are experiencing. Part of it's natural because of the nature of the transition we're moving through. Part of it's natural. You're going to have that. You're going to have, like, it's almost like things that are boiling from deep underneath are coming out. into the daylight, and it's almost like Ready or Not. That's sort of like something that's like a phrase that really encapsulates this whole time we're in. Ready or not, ready or not, things are changing. You can either be ready, but it's not going to stop changing if you're not ready. So, ready or not, a lot of that may actually be a good thing, because people change when they're forced to change. There's like forced adaptation, and different kinds of adaptations may be taking place while the pressure is on, like while the pressure is really on, in so many different ways. Social media, the way the media is working, like just very strange things going on there with how information is being displayed, how it's edited, how it inflames sides against each other, because that's what makes things viral. That's what gets clicks. That's what gets hits. Conflict, right? They don't, and it's funny because this literally governs election processes. If you want people to pay attention to you, you got to talk shit about your opponent. If you want to get headlines, you got to be the opposite thing, And it's funny because that's kind of like how it's built. It's a very, very strange thing. And I think this has gotten even more inflamed since the media really, really, you could say since TVs were put in people's homes, but I'm thinking like really in the 60s, like like at the end of World War II, when consumer culture really started taking off. And I think it has a lot to do with Pluto being in Leo. Pluto in Leo. The whole thing with Pluto in Leo had to do with indulgence. Just indulgence. But there's more to it than that. It's almost like reckless self-abandonment, paradoxically trying to find yourself through reckless self-abandonment. Like, I think Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl, which he wrote right at the end of Pluto in Libra, or Pluto in Leo, right at the end of that. That poem, Howl, is all about, that's like a Pluto in Leo poem. It's about people just indulging, doing a bunch of drugs, doing anything they can to like try and find themselves, just throwing themselves into the world, just like connecting with other people and trying to come together, and then, going back into solitude. And it's really rough and raucous, but also in certain kinds of ways enlightening. That's when we had the beat poets come out. People, there was like a intellectual thing, and things were being done very differently with how people were writing, like William Burroughs and others. Before, people were kind of shocked when Henry Miller wrote like Tropic of Cancer, or and like there were some sexual themes, and people were like, but fast forward to William Burroughs and others, Bukowski or anybody else, like anybody within that time frame, just writing stuff like, that's very powerful kind of Pluto Leo thing. But it also had a lot to do with consumer culture, the end of World War II, and the fact that we started really fantasizing about the possibilities with the technology that we had, like all this newfound technology that was now being mass produced and given to people. Of course, vehicles, cars have been around for a little while, but now it's like they were turning into giant boats, like almost small apartments, and television, and going to the drive-in and having your root beer float and watching movies and science fiction and getting into your thing, right? That's all like that whole time was about. Now you can see how, like, before this point, politics was pretty cut and dry. I'm not saying there wasn't manipulation and that sides weren't being pitted against each other in some fashion, but before that time, it was fairly cut and dry. You didn't have like, somebody might have been a conservative and somebody may have been more liberal or a Democrat, but that wasn't like an extreme kind of contention. It wasn't like how it is now. And I really think that stuff started with the media just branding politicians, and things getting really weird from that time, from Pluto and Leo, going into Pluto Virgo, Pluto Libra, Pluto Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, like that whole arc of Pluto transits. There was a gradual. There's a lot. I mean, I want to do actually a very long, in-depth look at these Pluto transits, because they are very, very accurate and very fascinating when you see how these miniature epochs affect like society, Western civilization, even the global culture. It's a fascinating thing. When Pluto enters a sign and the entire duration it's in a sign, everything about it is it's exactly like what that sign is about. Pluto entering Scorpio, Pluto entering Sagittarius, man, it's like right on the money. It's so funny. Right when Pluto entered Sagittarius, 1995, it's so funny. That's when the internet became a thing, really became a thing. And that's interesting because Sagittarius has everything to do with worldly knowledge, travel, interconnectedness throughout the world, friends and acquaintances that are foreign parts, but it's also about knowledge, worldly knowledge. Think of like Indiana Jones. You're going to uncover things in the world. You're traveling, and you have different contacts throughout the world, and you're gathering knowledge, and you're uncovering knowledge, and all that. Higher education. That's all very Sagittarius. Now, it's interesting. What happened right when Pluto entered Sagittarius in 1995? Boom, internet. And Pluto was in Sagittarius all the way until 2009. Now, what happened in that arc of time from 1995 to 2009? The internet exploded and took over human consciousness, okay? Now, really, I mean, and that is so Pluto in Sagittarius. That's really, really. And there's a lot I could talk about with that, but we see this with other signs as well. When Pluto was in Scorpio, what happened during that time? When Pluto was in Libra, what was going on during that time? A very, very fascinating arc of a story there. And it's so accurate that it's useful to pay attention to it, okay? This is not an arbitrary thing. But you could think of like that subject as like a kind of higher learning, a use of the mind that isn't just so fixated on things in particular, just in the moment. It's more like it's more like trying to make a coherent story. It's trying to make things coherent on a much broader scale instead of just being imprinted immediately by the thing you see in front of you, and like the duckling that's following the human that he imprinted on. That's kind of like what's going on. Whatever happens in the moment, whatever the media says in the moment, whatever trend is happening in the moment, you just follow it like the little duckling, right? But anybody who wants to break out of that, they kind of have a thing within them that just wants to break out of that. And that's when they start paying attention to greater things, greater movements, instead of getting sucked into just the particulars of one. Yeah, it can be good to look at the particulars of a period of time, a certain movement, certain ideas, but pulling back and really, really pulling back and not letting it grab you so much, not letting it imprint you. You're not letting your mind become this lemming, You have to have this higher mind. You could call it a higher mind. You could call it a deeper mind. You could call it the greater part of yourself that is being imprinted by something greater. Okay, and getting familiar with that is really important, because it's so easy to be imprinted by just the moment by moment mind, the linear mind, as if it's everything. And it's funny because it is. That's what the world is based on. It's so funny. And I think it's really interesting that when that starts breaking down, our literal experience of time is going to start breaking down as well. Linear time, that's going to start dilating. It's going to start becoming malleable in an interesting way. It doesn't mean linear time is going to collapse entirely. It doesn't mean the Earth is going to stop spinning or something. But what it does mean is that our mind's fixation of that process is just going to start getting broken up. The further we move into kind of more paradoxical, you could say, foundation that is beyond just what the mind perceives. It's like the substrate of physical reality that never fully manifests, but that is ever present. It's sort of like the substrate of mushrooms. You know, you have a substrate and all these individual mushrooms that come out of it. And they all seem so different, and they have their own ways and their own direction and all that, so individual, right? But the substrate is like that foundation of reality that never becomes a mushroom. That substrate never becomes one mushroom. It never differentiates itself, even though it's the source of all this differentiation. Now that's the thing. It never enters here. It never manifests, but it's the source at the same time. It's an interesting thing. It's like it's funny because a lot of times when people think about that, they're like, "What are you saying? It's all just nothing then? It's just nothing. It's just a blob. You're saying it's all just a blob?" It's like no. See, that's it kind of like a knee-jerk reaction to what I'm talking about. Like when you talk about the no thing, it's not devoid of meaning. Or like when you talk about the void with a capital V, it's not that there's nothing in the way you might think, right? It's the source of all things. It's the source of your mind, your soul, like your purpose. It is infinitely dense with meaning. It's you know, and while at the same time, again, it's infinitely intelligent, infinitely compassionate. While at the same time, it doesn't. It's not gonna like just come and take over your life like a puppeteer. You know, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. And like the New Message talks about, that's why physical reality was created. So that you could come into this temporary reality and experience what it's like to be apart from God, really. To experience what it's like to be apart, even though it really is infused in everything. Now, it's an interesting thing. Like, no, God is not presiding over random buckets of nails in the world. God is not presiding over hurricanes and tsunamis. You know, when that shit happens, people are like, God did it. God did it. No, God didn't do that, and God didn't create your miserable life either. God loves you so much that God gave you freedom of choice, the power of decision. Boy, what a gift. What a wonderful gift that you get to wake up every day and make your fucking decisions about how you're going to live your life. Take on responsibility, how you're going to manage this, how you're going to move through this. But that doesn't mean you're totally separate from Source. It means that you're in this really dense place to where things are so consequential, things are so able to be changed, things are so temporary. I mean, your life is temporary. This planet is temporary. Our sun is temporary. It's going to explode one day. And beyond that, all suns are temporary. Beyond that, this galaxy is temporary. All physical reality is temporary, but it's on a time scale that's so vast you can barely comprehend it. So we're in a place that is temporary. But there's a part of you that's eternal. It's permanent. But when we come here, we get imprinted. The mind gets imprinted with what's temporary, and we follow the temporary, and our filtration system, which is the mind of what's temporary. Like, oh, things are changing, the clouds are moving, everything, Like, yeah, that's nature, but it's not permanent. It has a regenerative quality because the source of life is within this changing reality, which you could say, yeah, that's knowledge, that's source. But it doesn't like micromanage, and that's the big difference, like that people need to understand with when you're thinking about God and all that, the source of life. It's not micromanaging every little bird that's going to get a berry on a tree or all that, anything. It's not micromanaging your life. Everything is running itself because the laws of physical reality were set in motion at the beginning of time. So God doesn't have to be here like just with his ear to everything and like listening to everybody's prayers and and they're lamenting, and it just doesn't work like that. And so in a funny way, the atheists are right in a strange way, but not in the way they think they are. They're right, but theists are also right. So it's interesting how they're like, I've noticed that like kind of like hyper intellectual scientism atheist types, they're sort of on the same level as religious zealots and fundamentalists. One thing is they both take everything way too literally. They can't think symbolically or multidimensionally for some reason, which is really strange. So it's just that they're both doing it in different ways. The atheist looks at these stories in the Bible and is like, that's just ridiculous. Why would you believe that? Because they can't think symbolically. They don't understand what the symbols mean. And even if somebody explains it to them, they're not impressed. They don't even care because it's not speaking to them in a deeper place. So they're taking it literally, even though they don't believe it. But then the other side of the coin are the fundamentalists who are also taking it literally, but they do believe it. They are, so it's interesting. It's like two sides of the same coin, but when you become integrated at higher levels, it's like you can believe in God, you can experience God, but you also are very objective about the realities that you live in, that God doesn't control everything. God isn't creating tsunamis. God isn't starting wars because he hates a group of people. Or, all that stuff, that shit just doesn't exist. And you can see why at these lower levels, if you want to call them that, that's why there's been so much people rebelling against ideas of God because of how it's interpreted, how it's spoken of and taught. But there are higher levels where there's more integration, right? You're integrating at higher levels to where you're not having knee-jerk reactions to things. You can take that on. You can take this on because who's to say your definitions of things at this moment is like some kind of universal thing? That's arrogance. That's intellectual arrogance on just a ridiculous level, You have to be open. You have to be open to receive certain kinds of things. And you can entertain, you can think, you can experience, but you're not just, and this all has to do like with the mind. And that's why the mind has been such a huge issue in Buddhism, Sufism, any like occult order or any order where you have to train your mind and become very disciplined about how your mind is being focused. You have to meditate. You have yantras, mantras, you have yogas, you have, ways of training your mind to not just be, going insane and all over the place, interpreting your reality, because it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to follow the mind like the Pied Piper if you don't have anything higher, anything deeper that you're following, that you're listening for, that you come to understand as the true order of things. It's because this reality is just so convincing. It's really convincing. Yet the fact that you have a mind that just won't shut off, well, that must be God, right? Your mind is not God, really. And that's a huge relief. Thank God, really. Your mind is not God. Thank God. Felt like going off on a little tangent with all this stuff, so thanks for watching.